Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blabbit. It's great to see you on board with us here today. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, in this particular episode, we are spanning the globe to bring you a constant variety of expert insights. And we'll explain that in a moment when we talk about where we're all coming from. We're covering a lot of ground. For those of you who are just tuning in, we are sponsored by Open Doors, your premier corporate communication partner and podcasting partner, making sure that employee engagement is at its highest. My name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking coach and presentation expert out of New York City, and I make sure that people feel comfortable and confident delivering the messages they need to deliver to be more persuasive in business. Hey, Glenn, good to see you.
Good to see you, Paul. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Glenn Ingram. I've been working for the last 20 years, helping people become better listeners, better communicators, so that they can influence people in the sales arena. Good morning, Mr. Rafleson. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thanks. Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Okay. Sure. I'd love to do that. I am an attorney, and I spent most of my life practicing law for really big companies like Microsoft and GE and Walmart, and sort of by accident on a blog post, I became an e-commerce lawyer. It was, I used to be an e-commerce seller. I paid for law school, flipping stuff back in the early 2000s before, there was Amazon shipping, and somebody asked me to write a blog post about tax issues and e-commerce, and that's when I realized, that's when the calling happened, that I knew that I had to do something different. And for the last 4 years, we've had a very interesting e-commerce practice and helping business owners from all over the world with lots of issues, a lot of Amazon. Obviously, that's a big chunk of what we do, and that's always fun. And one other thing I'll say I do is that I also, in addition to being an e-commerce lawyer, I'm also an e-commerce advocate. So I actually started a nonprofit trade association. So not only do I practice law, I volunteer my time to advocate for legal policy that I think is better for e-commerce businesses. And so, for example, last year there was the big antitrust investigation in Amazon. We were the most cited. Our nonprofit called the Online Merchants Guild was the most cited resource that the antitrust committee relied upon in writing their report on Amazon. So I thought that was pretty cool. So that's kind of what I do.
Great. Well, Paul, thank you for being on Blabbit here today. And just to clarify, my spanning the globe, Glenn is on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. And today, Paul is in Europe. You're coming to us from Poland. Is that correct?
That's right. I'm coming to you, hence the dress down. It is 6 o'clock, a little after 6 o'clock here in Poland, and I'm on the Baltic Sea, enjoying this wonderful country, which my wife is from, but I love being here. So we're spending a little bit of time here. And I will say that it is the currency is unusually high in favor of the US dollar. So I might be enjoying it a little too much. I feel like I'm the king of Poland all of a sudden, because it's just absurdly, I've never seen it this high since I've been coming here for 20 years. So, but it's a beautiful time on the Baltic. Who knew Poland had beaches?
Wow. That is news to me. I don't think of that, but it makes perfect sense. Okay. So in terms of, I've been checking out some of the things on your websites and some of the information online, and it seems like you are a very busy man these days. So what are the majority of people coming to you to fix? What do they need to have either changed, supported, or reversed?
This is a great question. So, our law practice is sort of built on the business needs of an e-commerce business owner. So whether that's, how do I launch my e-commerce business? How do I grow my e-commerce business? And my personal favorite subject, how do I exit my e-commerce business? Meaning, how do I sell my business? Which we participate in as a lawyer, not as a broker. I just want to be clear. We're your counsel. We're the ones looking out for you. But that's always a happy time, right? That's always fun to see your clients do that, to go from launch to launch mode, growth mode, exit mode. And then I would say it's launch, grow, exit, and then repeat, because once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. So my clients tell me, this is my first time through it as a owner of a law practice, but that's kind of what we're there. So if it's how to start, how to get a trademark, or if it's, how to comply with the laws in this product category that I'm selling. And of course, there's, because we do a lot of Amazon work, there's how to deal with Amazon. They're going to shut down my account. They're going to shut down my ASIN. That's just nonstop. I mean, we're constantly dealing with that.
So when you're dealing with e-commerce businesses, what are the primary or most common pitfalls or problems they encounter along the way that may limit them or lead to them being an e-commerce business that may not last that first year?
Yeah, I mean, it's so many things. I mean, obviously, intellectual property always tends to trip people up, not doing sort of the diligence on that. But if you shouldn't launch a business if you're infringing on somebody's trademark, and you might think but you don't know. And similar with patents, you've got it's so hard to say. I'm going to take a step back to that question, because it's a really hard question to answer, because there's just so many different angles where you can come at it. It could be taxes, it can be your business structure, protecting your assets. But the one example I'm going to give you that I deal with, one fun thing we deal with is, have you the Americans with Disabilities Act? Are you familiar with that law at all?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll give you an example. Like just because we run the gamut of issues. I mean, the issues never end. And I think what attracts me to this is I come from a big law environment. I worked for Microsoft, right? Huge companies, right? Fortune 10 companies. And I was trained to think a little bit wider, right? I mean, not the lawyer you would typically hire if you were opening up a store on Main Street in your town, right? That's not really what we do. And that's not really who I am. And with e-commerce, really we've spawned this concept of a global small business. That's sort of my term, right? Like the idea of global small, it's like an oxymoron, right? Like, how can you be a global small business prior to e-commerce? It wouldn't make sense. But today, thanks to e-commerce, that's actually what most of our clients are. They're global small businesses. So the issues are out there. And one of my favorites is this ADA thing, because this is crazy. It's your website, right? Like, if your website isn't compliant, meaning if a person who is visually challenged cannot access your website and access the content, you may be in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And there are lawyers who literally are just going after websites. They're just, not just big websites, right? Because most of the big companies comply. They're going after the little guy. And it's not because they can sue for damage, but they can get their attorney's fees. And usually they settle for a nice 15, 20K. And all they have to do is, send you a letter, file a lawsuit. So it's almost like they're bounty hunting. And it's such an easy thing to fix if but 99 times out of 100, my client doesn't even know that there is an ADA responsibility with websites, which, kind of has been a bit of a gray area, but better to be safe than sorry, especially since they now actually said that it is, the government is saying their interpretation of the ADA is that you do actually have to have a compliant website. So it's a crazy issue that we see all the time.
Now, I know that, Glenn, you've talked about this as well. And are there different states that clamp down a little bit harder than others?
Well, you have some states that have more punitive laws. California, no surprise, has a law to where if you violate or discriminate against a disabled person with your website, you must pay them a minimum of $4,000 per occurrence, which is kind of a gray area, plus their attorney fees, like Paul mentioned. And that's why, right now in California, for just an informational site like an attorney's website or a plumber's website, they're settling for $18,000 to $20,000. For e-commerce websites, we're seeing them demanding $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 because they have this misperception, I believe, that people with e-commerce sites have deep pockets. So it's kind of a wild, wild west, if you will. I kind of call it legal extortion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of that out there. There's, there's other ones. California has a whole environmental law policy called Proposition 65, which invites bounty hunter lawyers. So this kind of behavior is not uncommon, and we see that. And one of the things we challenge whether, if you're an e-commerce business and maybe you're not that big, like whether can California really enforce their law against you? That's kind of an open question, but that's sort of that's the world we're in right now. It's a huge mess, and that's kind of where I see myself, is sort of like I'm trying to help people navigate an area that hasn't, like, the road hasn't been paved. There's a lot of core constitutional law that you wouldn't even think that our Constitution would apply to this stuff that we don't know the answer to in e-commerce. And until we start getting answers, which is something we're working on, but that takes time, a lot of time, you're going to have to play it safe and play it right. And, in the case of like ADA compliance, yeah, I'm a big advocate of having your website, because it's not that hard, right? I mean, it's not that easy. Like, there's a lot of people selling snake oil versions of ADA, but, working with qualified people who can make ADA compliant websites, why not? I mean, it just protects you. Whereas, like, if it was sales tax, I would tell you something different, because I have a different point of view on that. So it just depends on the issue. But that's what I'm saying. There's so many issues out there in e-commerce today. It's crazy. So, and we just don't fully know the answers. So we got to go with what we know. What is our best sort of, I don't want to say assumption, but where do we think the law is headed in this direction, and kind of act accordingly, or make judgments based on material risk assessments. So for me, ADA compliance, very high risk. Well, very high risk if you get hit, but also very high risk, like very not that hard to prevent, right? Just hire somebody who can do that stuff and get it done. And don't fall for the snake oil. So sorry for the rant. I like to rant. I apologize. I may have done one. I'm not good at the public speaking.
Glenn, can I ask another one real quick?
Please.
I know many of our viewers of Blabbit right now probably feel the same way I do. I want to go back to a comment you made before, Paul, which is copyright infringement. Can you give us just maybe 2 or 3 examples that you've experienced that people unwittingly have created a situation based on copyright infringement?
Yeah, here's the classic. You hire somebody from a website like, was it Fiverr, right? You hire somebody in Fiverr to make web content for you. Where are they getting that web content? They're getting it from Google Photos, right? And they're incorporating it into your website, into their work product. And you're just assuming you're getting it from the Fiverr person. You didn't know that they just took a photo off of Google Photos. And then there's actually software out there and law firms that use the software that'll scan websites. And if they see photos that are tied to, like, if you sell stock photography and you're associated with that photo, you can get sued. They'll sue, they'll threaten you and, demand settlement. So that's a classic case, or just the seller, forget Fiverr, the seller themselves just thinking they can use Google Photos. That's a classic case of copyright infringement, right? Similarly with Fiverr, a lot of times people don't realize that the contracts that you have with those consultants do not actually give you ownership of the content they provide. And you have to make sure you get that contract, right? I mean, that's, you want to own the content that they're giving you and make sure that you own it and you understand what's inside of it. So that's a classic situation.
For anyone watching this that has their e-com business, look up and research EXIF, EXIF data, because an EXIF data reader is how these law firms like you're mentioning are going out, looking at images, scanning for it to find ownership, stuff like that. It's not very difficult. And if someone just goes there and takes a look at that and tests that data on their website, they'll know if they have anything that has potential legalities.
And then, you've got your classic, just copying other content. Like, photos are usually the biggest place where you see a lot of copyright. But also, you can have, if a product that you're selling and what you saw something that somebody else is selling and you copied it, but there's, unique elements of copyright design embedded in that product, and you copied it, or you copied someone's label. Like, I mean, it just happens all the time. And so you've got copyright, which is sort of, sort of like creativity, basically works of authorship. Then you have trademark, which is like your brand. And, sometimes people just go and they launch a brand and, they don't really know, because unfortunately you really don't know for sure if your brand's going to work. Probably at least 6 or 9 months in the US, because if you register, if I register a trade, or if I file for trademark registration today, I think at best 5-6 months I'll get it signed at best. Then usually that means, and if I get a sign, it usually means there's an issue. Hopefully it's not a big deal. But if all goes smoothly, yeah, I mean, it's taking over 1 year to really get a full trademark registration these days. USPTO really got slammed with COVID. So you don't really even know if your brand is, so imagine you're launching a product, you want to start your Shopify today. You've got products coming in, you're putting your brand on it. You have your supplier, you gave them, 15 grand to put your brand on it, only to find out in a few months that your brand isn't valid. You can't sell it, right? So, I mean, these are the classic, e-commerce issues that we see, especially in the launch phase, that are always a problem. Is basically, how to operate with your brand. Everyone wants to move quick, but, so you've got to make sure you're working with folks who can at least give you some guidance and assurance. Well, yeah, nobody can give you full assurance, but at least some guidance and say, that's definitely a problem. So, we have certain resources we can use to sort of scan the web in addition to just the USPTO. It's not just the USPTO website to see if there's potential, infringement issues related to what you're trying to do. So, I always, like to recommend using lawyers, right? I mean, that's kind of the gist of what we do. We build our practice not to be expensive. I always say, I think my competition is not other lawyers in this business, but it's like the LegalZoom mentality that, stop trying to do everything yourself, learn to delegate. This stuff is complicated. And, sometimes people who teach this stuff and tell you you can just do it yourself, they're just lucky. They don't know what they're talking about. They just got lucky because they got away with it. And so they think that if they can save you a few $1,000s in legal fees, or if it's even that much, then they can justify their course cost that way. So it's kind of, I just always tell people to be wary of that sort of like DIY mentality, because, most of, we're not a litigation firm, but I say most of the time when my clients get in trouble, it's usually preventable. Like, had they known me beforehand or had they talked to me beforehand, the issue wouldn't have happened. We would have advised them differently, right? Had we had the opportunity to do so before. So that's why I think it's just good to have that relationship, as self-serving as that might sound, being that I am a lawyer, but so I'm not saying hire me. I'm just saying lawyers, or any lawyer, work with whatever lawyer you want, but just work with lawyers who know what they're doing, and don't try to do this yourself. So sorry to turn this into a what do they call it? What do they call it? It's like a Yo Joe, the more you know. What is it? Forget it. I might be dating myself.
Sticking with compliance, again, some more things that it's always what the business owner doesn't know. They may build a website like you mentioned, Shopify, and they have the misperception that all this stuff is going to be taken care of for them. So with compliance, we've had GDPR in Europe for a few years, and I believe in the last 36 or no, maybe 18 months, we've had 26 states enter into compliance laws, privacy laws.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms, and whether they're enforceable. I mean, but how easy is it to do? How easy is it to comply with it? I mean, on the front end, to have the policies, right? That part, you can put them out there. But yeah, I mean, that's all gray area in the law that I'm talking about, because I'm not sure it's fully enforced. These state laws are enforceable. It may be unduly burdensome. How do you, if they're, I think everyone's copying the California model, but there's variation, and you're in e-commerce. What are you gonna have to have like 50 different policies for each? I mean, it's a crazy concept, and the federal government hasn't really adopted fully these, deep models that California is, which was based on GDPR. But then again, the question is, even if I'm right about what I'm saying right now, is that, I'm sort of giving the law professor's analysis, because I do teach con law and I teach a tax course on constitutional law. Why do you want the hassle, right? Sometimes I could be right in the law and I could be right in the analytics, but it might just be cheaper to just do what the state says and not have to worry about it, or do your best, do something, comply with California, find the hardest state to comply with and comply with that one. And if it's not, it may be cheaper, because if it does become a problem for you, if you do get sued, like, it's expensive, right? And that's always my job. I want to keep my clients out of court all day long. Like that's the kind of law firm we are. We don't want our clients going to court, because we know the courts, there's no justice in the U.S. court system unless you have a lot of money at stake and a lot of money to spend. So with small businesses, it's a different style of practice. So prevention is the best form of medicine, unlike in life, right?
What we're talking about, everyone, real quick, Paul, is
Sure.
Privacy, tracking your data, terms and conditions and stuff like that. A lot of people are seeing on websites now at the bottom, you have the right to accept these cookies or you don't. That's kind of what we're talking about with privacy. And
oh yeah, I hate it. Everywhere I go in Poland, it's like I just want to Google something real fast, and I can't, because every time you go to Google, it's like you have to accept these. I'm like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, but no, we're seeing it in the United States now too. So, but that's what we all need to comply. I mean, we have to consider their compliance with those things, because is it worth not complying, right?
Mm-hmm. So, if you have an online business or someone has just started or relatively new online business, what are really the top 3 things that they should watch out for? Make sure, without a doubt. I know we've already covered ADA compliance, but maybe 2 other things that you really have to make sure you've got those ducks in a row before you get going, because they can be the biggest holes in your game.
Yeah, I mean, you got to know what you're selling, right? I mean, we've talked about intellectual property, but let's dig into 2 little other elements. Like if you're reselling products, know where you're getting it from. If you can't prove it's authentic, that's a problem. Similarly, if you're sourcing products from China, or anywhere, realize that you are the main target now, right? So if I resell a product that's made by Sony, right, I might get sued if that Sony product blows up and, somebody's car catches on fire because of that or something. But they're also going to sue Sony, right? So I'm technically liable, but they're going to sue, and that's really who they're going to go after, right? They're going to go after because it's kind of Sony's fault. They made the product, right? Unless it can be proven that I did something to it after the fact. It's generally going to be seen as this is Sony's fault. But now when you're manufacturing, right, you're the last stop, right? You're the backstop, right? So you're the one who gets sued if it goes wrong. So know what you're selling, know where you're buying from, know that's compliant, test your products, make sure there's no lead in the products, right? I mean, you think that's obvious, but don't just take your manufacturer at their word. When their manufacturer hands you documents saying, here's your compliance docs, don't assume they're correct, right? They're not. A lot of times they're not. And it's just not that hard to do these things on your own. But to me, that's the most frustrating, because, it's the stories, especially with Amazon, you see it all the time. It's like, kids' products with lead. I mean, it's just, it's like you just can't. Like, we have to be compliant. And be mindful of your marketing strategies, right? I mean, if you're using influencers, for example, like the FTC's cracking down on this, like how you generate buzz and reviews or any of this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense out there. There's a lot of, do it for you or systems, and a lot of it's outdated and will get in trouble. So, I mean, it's just, I don't know. I mean, this is why you should come to us. I mean, this is why we've created programs in our outside of our law practice. We actually have legal plans that you can be a part of that make it really cheap and affordable to talk to lawyers, so that before you make those decisions, you can just run it by us, right? Give me 15 minutes of your time and we'll tell you exactly what you need to know about that, and before you make that mistake. So, I mean, those are my pet peeves, right? If you're working with an influencer, for example, the influencer has to disclose that you're paying them or you're giving them free stuff, like that they can't not, it can't look like it's natural, right? If an influencer just happens to come upon your product on their own and just wants to rave about it, that's fine. And if that drives traffic to you, that's great, but that rarely happens. Usually they will contact you and they want something for it. They want to be paid. They want some benefit, some incentive, and you have to have them. They have to disclose that. So just little things like that. I mean, there's just, it's e-commerce is such a crazy world, because you've got so many state laws, federal law, international law. I mean, that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying, like, the laws are really kind of unpaved, because really the small businesses now change this thing, because it's like, how complicated are we going to make it for small business? Do we like small businesses being commerce? I think so. But we also have concerns, because small businesses sometimes don't know, those things that like Walmart or Target would know. And when they don't know that can be bad for the consumer, dangerous for the consumer. And that's sort of, those are the competing interests that you have right now in the e-commerce world, and how the law is sort of set out. So I don't know if that was a 2 as you asked for, but that's my peeve, I guess. This is one of my peeves.
It's getting much clearer, Paul. It really is. I mean, it just seems like an 800-pound gorilla in the room when you think about e-commerce being able to cover your liabilities in that regard. So I know I do. I appreciate you drilling down. I like that.
Now, you mentioned earlier about taking a course on taxes. I think this is one of the things that I've heard people with e-commerce pulling their hair out, trying to understand your state sales taxes, your different tax platforms. Again, not speaking on California, but it's just too easy to do. You know, when you sell something in California at a discount, you must tax on the retail price, not the wholesale price. So do you have any suggestions or advice for e-commerce businesses to know exactly how to make sure they're dotting their I's, crossing their T's, so they don't get that little bill from the franchise commission in California that says, hey, you owe me some money?
Yeah, tax might be the death of e-commerce, actually, as we stand right now. We've got we've got a federal lawsuit and a Pennsylvania lawsuit on this issue. So I'm empathetic. It's actually, like I said, it was the issue that brought me into this world. That was the blog that launched everything. And it's not the majority of what I do anymore. And, I used to have, like I said, I have a tax background. And when you're in tax, you kind of touch everything subject matter wise, which I think is kind of neat. But to your point, it's hard to say without knowing, because, there's different levels at which you can get, and people think, oh, it's $100,000, 200 transactions. Not that simple. So it really has to be done in a different way, in a different sort of mindset. And you have to do a little bit of cost benefit analysis, because at the end of the day, if, you could register and be compliant with all 50 states. If you're a small business, you're making, $100,000, you'll spend more than $100,000 being compliant with all 50 states based on what they think you are supposed to do right now today. Right. Especially like if you're using Amazon, right? Like if you're using Amazon, they're all states are going to say you instantaneously, or the majority of them are going to say you instantaneously have to be registered, filing sales tax, income tax, personal income tax, all these crazy tax returns. And you'll spend $2,000 filing a tax return in Mississippi so that you can pay them $12. I mean, it's just stupidity. This is the definition of what we call a burden on interstate commerce in the Constitution. But the law hasn't been paved yet. We're paving it. Like I said, this is through our nonprofit. We got lawsuits in the federal court and the state court. So tax is a nightmare. So what I do is, like, I always encourage people, just, schedule a consultation with us and let's go over your business plan and let's talk about where you are now, where you need to start thinking about, taxes, and at each step of the game. If you're doing wholesale, obviously, make sure you have your resale certificates. You don't want to pay tax on, when you buy something and you're going to resell it, you shouldn't be paying sales tax when you buy it, right? You should be only collecting the sales tax upon sale if you're required to. So so then you may need to register to make sure you can capture that benefit, but not necessarily in every state. So it's so much nuance. That's a hard one to just, I don't really have, there's no rule of thumb, unfortunately, with taxes. And it's like I said, if the government has their way, they're going to destroy small business e-commerce. It's pretty sad, but we're going to stop them. I mean, we're going to fix it. I'm confident we'll get there. I don't think, I don't think it's intentional. I think you just have to look at the people who are in charge of tax departments at the state level, like the groupthink that is. And, also think about how these are the same people who might ask Mark Zuckerberg on, how do you make money with Facebook if you don't charge users? They're just the mentality. These people are from a different era, right? People who run tax departments, the government, and they're part of that collective group think at the state level. They're just from a different era. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just, they create concepts like cookie nexus and they think they're brilliant, and they're actually morons. Sorry to say it, to be blunt, but they just publish a policy that says if you have a chat bot on your website, you have to file taxes in the state. If you have an automated chat bot like a ManyChat flow, you're basically having a customer service agent in the state. So you have a customer service agent in every state where your customers are. So I mean, this is like I said, it's idiotic, and it just, unfortunately, that's where we are. So careful what you ask for. That's another sensitive subject for me too, because that's just really read my Supreme Court brief on that subject. You'll see. So.
Well, now it's interesting. You're talking about the tax jurisdiction in various states. Is that just a blanket statement when you're working on the internet, or do you have to? Are there certain red flag components to your business that will trigger that within particular states? I know you brought up having maybe a customer service agent who is located in a particular state? Does that?
Oh, no. Oh,
flag?
no. That's what I'm saying. The new group thing that they just published a couple months ago, and California's already adopted, is that if you have a chat bot, like an automated chat bot, those autoresponders.
Yes.
If the customer in Minnesota interacts with that chat bot, you have nexus in Cali because you're offering customer service to a Minnesota resident. It's just they're out of their minds. That's what I'm saying. Like they've lost the plot on taxation, and you have to read. It's the Multi-State Tax Commission's latest, and it's all about income tax now. That's the big push. Is they want us all paying income tax, which, for the majority of Americans would just mean you'd be paying less tax to your home state and more tax. You dividing up your income like a pizza and paying it up to all the states, which is, like I said, a lot of work. It's the work of compliance is the problem. The tax itself is not going to be a problem. We'd all gladly pay the tax, is what I always tell the government, but you just make it really hard. Why don't you make it easy? There are varying thresholds and things like that the states, but they're always looking for the loopholes. So, like, for example, a lot of states adopt this threshold that you have to have 200 sales or $100,000 in sales to collect sales tax, to be deemed to have under the state's jurisdiction for tax. But if you use Amazon and use their fulfillment services, which pretty much puts you in every state at once, then that you don't even get the protection of that threshold. So they're always looking for the way out, or the ManyChat flow would break that threshold, right? So there's so much gamesmanship, and I'm used to that gamesmanship, and I'm appreciative of that gamesmanship when you're dealing with companies like Microsoft or Google who spend millions and millions of dollars in tax strategy, right, to avoid billions in taxes, right? Not pay billions in taxes. I get it, and that's a fair fight. But when you're doing this to the little guy, it's a little guy or little girl, it's really messed up, and that's where it's like they're tired of fighting the big companies, and they think, okay, we can just step on the little people, especially because most of them are out of state. That's who they're going after. So there's no it's just kind of a really sick system right now, the way it's all set up. So I don't mean to be depressing, but I don't also want to scare people, because I think it's still a good time to do e-commerce. Because again, you just have to do the math, right? If it's going to cost you $2,000 or $3,000 to file a Mississippi tax return, and you're only going to owe Mississippi like $20 at the end of it all, right? Then let Mississippi send you a bill, right? So you really have to just look at life through a cost benefit materiality kind of lens and say, like, okay, well, if Mississippi, rather than paying $2,000 to pay Mississippi $20, why don't I just let Mississippi come and find me when the time is, and they'll send me a bill for $20 plus some penalty plus some interest, but it won't be $2,000. So I'll probably still be better off. I mean, it's stupid that we'd have to think like that, but that's kind of the environment we're in. Whereas I actually don't think, for most Amazon e-commerce companies, I don't really think you would have to pay that, right? Like, I mean, there's a constitutional law element that protects us from these things. That's supposed to, but they have to be litigated. So that's why it's another example where I say the law hasn't been paved yet, but we kind of know what it should be. This is what being an e-commerce lawyer is, right? We're kind of, this is how I was trained. This is what I do, right? We don't think about, I never was trained to think about things on a micro level. We always think macro because we work for macro sized companies. And I love the fact that I get to bring that mindset to small businesses, which is, again, something I never thought I would ever, I would never think that a small business would be my client, 10 years ago. That just wouldn't make sense. Why would they need me? It wouldn't make sense, but here we are. That's e-commerce for you.
Now, so people can understand just the simplest version, this tax you're talking about with the chatbot, isn't that kind of a misinterpretation, in my opinion, and expansion upon, as a salesperson, if I sold in New York, sold in New Jersey, sold in Connecticut, whatever commissions I received in those states, I would have to file state income tax for those. Is that kind of what this new chatbot legislation or tax code is an expansion upon that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interpretation of so imagine like all the states get together in a room. Like, imagine each state was like a person. Each state was a person, and like you've got Minnesota, you've got California, you've got New York, and each state is like a person, and they all get in a room together and discuss tax policy. That happens. That really happens. It's called the Multi-State Tax Commission, and they all get together and discuss tax policy, and they come up with and then this commission comes out with publications that the states then sort of independently adopt as policy. or law if it needs to be law. So in this case, it's policy. It's not even law, which means it doesn't have to go through any form of legislative approval process. It is what it is. They're just saying that's their interpretation, and a lot of states are buying into it, and that's what they're saying. But it's just nonsense, and I think it is wrong. But here we are. It's just like I said. Look at who we're dealing with, right? Those people who are in that room are from a different era. They just aren't in tune with e-commerce. They're not, they're still. I once had somebody from New York ask me if you can still pay with a check on eBay or Amazon or something on Amazon. This was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But I mean, like that's just, that's who you're dealing with. Like these people are just not. You're educated. Half the time I'm talking to these people, I'm educating them because they really don't know how it all works. And then they're writing policy because they think they know, and it's terrible. So. But yeah, that's what this is about. It's about paying income tax. That's their focus. There is a federal law that's supposed to protect you from paying income tax, especially if you're just, making sales and you're not in the state, or if you're in the state but only soliciting sales. There's a whole. I'm not going to get into the nuances of that law. It's called PL 86272. It's from 1959. If anyone wants to read it, but it's written for a different era, and it's very focused on tangible activity, and at a time when that's all there was no intangible, which is what the world we live in now. And so what the states are doing is they're leveraging the fact that the law was written in 1959, and instead of respecting the spirit of the law, they're taking the most literal interpretation and ignoring some of the other things about it, and coming up with these stupid ideas. Like if you have an automated chatbot on your website, you have this, you're deemed in the state. Like that's just idiotic. So I don't know how else to describe it. It's a sad state of affairs. We have to deal with that.
Well, you guys have characterized all of this as being the wild, wild west. For a long time, did people get away with dodging tax with e-commerce? Has that been?
I don't think so. I really think it's the government's fault. I think on the Amazon side, I think Amazon probably got away with dodging more taxes than anybody else, because really a lot of the taxes that our clients get told that they owe through Amazon, really, if you look at the law, and you look at Amazon's own statements, it's the Amazon store, they should have been paying that tax. So on that side, and then with the websites, no, I mean there was a a constitutional law, there was case law, and just common sense, right? Like this is new commerce, new industry. We don't want to burden it to death, right? Like that's what we don't want to do. So I don't think so. And I think the government has done nothing to make it easy. And there is precedent for making this much easier, right? We had a similar scenario to this with trucking when they were taxing the fuel taxes on the different trucks as you drive throughout the states. You have to pay tax on the fuel you burn throughout the different states, and they were making the truckers register in like every state, and they were going crazy. And eventually Congress mandated what was called the International Fuel Tax Agreement, which started with like Oregon and another state, and Congress said, no, every state needs to do this. And basically what that did was it just streamlined the process. So now instead of you're a trucker, you don't have to register as a taxpayer in 50 states. You can just file one tax return with your home state, and then they have basically a middle person who then redistributes, you report where you drove, and then they redistribute the money, and they all say, so you put the burden on the government to figure it out. And I mean, I just don't know why sales tax couldn't be like that. Why can't we have central clearinghouse, just be innovative and make it easier? And the government's, this is something I told the Supreme Court in the Wayfair case, which is the big Supreme Court case on sales tax, is that, for the last 25 years, the states have been complaining about e-commerce tax, and their inabilities to collect all of it, but yet they've done nothing to address the burdens that it would, they've leveraged none of this technology. I mean, it's practically pen and paper at this point, just as it was 30 years ago. I mean, it's not much better. And I think that's the problem. So, like I said, we think tax is fine. Like we never complain about taxes. Our clients don't complain about the taxes, in terms of a prospective obligation, but it's the work. It's if you're a small business and you're making 120 grand out of your kitchen table in Western Kentucky, where do you even find a tax accountant who can do 50 states worth of sales tax returns and income tax returns, unless you're hiring, Ernst & Young or KPMG, the same accounting firms that the big companies use? I mean, where do you even find that person in Western Kentucky? I mean, it's really, in my opinion, it's a shame on the governments, the state governments, for not, collectively figuring out a better solution. for how to make this easier. So that's my rant on that topic.
All right. Well, let's talk about something more exciting for the e-commerce business. Let's talk about that exit. What should they plan for? What should they look for? What should they do to protect themselves to make sure they're maximizing their revenue for all the hard work they put in to build this business?
Yeah, exits are great. We did about 200 million for our clients in terms of helping them close out their businesses. It's a very exciting time to be with your client through that process. It's very emotional, and it's hard. One thing, if you're an e-commerce company, whether it's service, whatever you're doing, you want to make sure your ducks are in a row. So you want to have, if you're a brand owner, you better make sure your brand is good, right? Like that everything's in order, that you own the products, there are no patents, that, you just want, everything needs to be, tip top. And this is where like good legal hygiene along the way can really help, because like I said, I mean, nothing better than finding out that my client's product was designed, copyright was designed by somebody on Fiverr, and then we got to go track down somebody on Fiverr to get them sign a document saying that it's actually my client's copyright, because they didn't know that they needed to do that. And you're selling your business and you're promising the buyer that you have title to these assets, right? So remember, you're promising the buyer you have title to these assets. Those are the types of things we look for. So we want to make sure that you can actually transfer the assets, right? Because nobody wants to buy a house that you don't own, right? I don't want to buy a house from a seller who doesn't own the house that they're selling me, right? And that's always a concern. So you want to make sure that you really do own the stuff, that your legal hygiene is clear. I mean, as far as what can you do, I mean, obviously, the better time to sell, I always say the best time to sell is when you kind of feel like you've taken it to where, you feel like you've taken it to a good place. And at this point, you're ready to move on, and that somebody else can come in and take it from here. If that's how you feel, it's always better to sell on an uptrend, because trends are important. If they don't feel like the business can grow, that's not going to value very well. In terms of finding a buyer, there are brokers out there. Some brokers are better than others. Some are really terrible. Some are really good. Sometimes you need an investment banker. There's a difference. Make sure to, I always think you should, again, working with a lawyer. This is a very self-serving conversation, it seems, because I am a lawyer, but I'm not saying you have to use me, just work with a lawyer. But even that contract you sign with an agent or broker or whomever who's going to represent your business and put it out there to be sold needs to be negotiated, because sometimes those terms are unfair. What's a fair commission? What's a reasonable commission? How much should you be paying them every month for and stuff like that. And then, of course, my biggest thing is like, don't go for deals where it's like the equity, I don't like these equity deals. I don't like these minority interest. I'm going to maintain a minority interest. Unless you don't care about that. My point is really what I always tell my clients is the money you get, the cash you get, on the closing day that's really the most you should count on. Everything else after that should be gravy. So similar with a minority stake. You can get easily, they're going to want a lot of control, and they're going to want a lot of rights to basically dilute you out. Whatever, it doesn't mean they're going to, but they're going to want the right to, or the freedom to. And so you have to realize that, the minority stake may not be worth anything. So always focus on cash and the last thing is, what do I do during an exit? So you kind of understand my role is that, oftentimes our clients already have negotiated the deal. They've negotiated the price for their business. And my job is really to help you negotiate the risk, because what people don't realize is that if that deal doesn't work, if that business doesn't work out in the future for that buyer, they may have claims against you. They may be able to get their money back from you. They may be able to get more than their money back from you. They may be able to go after your house. So, it's like those types of things are things to think about going into a deal. That's why good legal hygiene is always really good. Maybe having your asset protection structure set up before, early on in life. If you have assets, that outside of your e-commerce business, maybe you worked and you have a 401k that's, doing really well. Although these days, right, you may want to move those assets into certain vehicles and things. So, we always try to think about just protecting our client, right? Because most of the times in exit, especially with a small business, you're going to sign personally, right? Like, we're used to this idea that LLCs protect us by limiting our assets to only those in the business, but not when you sell your business. They want your personal guarantee, because if something goes wrong, they want to be able to sue not just the business, they want to sue you, because you're the one who's going to get the money. the end of the day. You're going to pay that money to yourself. So that's the thought process. And what'll be left of your business will likely be a shell company. So that's kind of, I don't know. I mean, that's the fastest I've ever, I think, tried to explain exits in sort of a broader sense. But I think hopefully people will get something from that, and that helps people kind of just, see what's out there. I talk a lot about this subject. It's like I said, it's one of my favorite things in the law practice.
All right. So earlier you brought up the fact that the exit day, or the day that you sell your company, is a very emotional day because it's a big deal. It's the culmination of many years of work and validation of the value that you've created. But does the buyer always have that right to come back and say that this is not what I thought I bought? Is that
well? That's what we're going to
have that right, but can you protect against them having that right? Can you actually write that into an agreement?
Yeah, you can write anything in an agreement, right? So that's my point. I mean, that's what we're negotiating. It's like, to what extent does the buyer have that right? Is what we negotiate, right? Is it maybe he has a right up to 20%, right? Maybe he has a right. Maybe certain things that you make, certain promises about your business, like you're actually the owner of the business, you're who you say you are. Maybe that's 100%, but maybe other things like you comply with all laws. That's hard to know. I don't know any Amazon e-commerce or Amazon seller knows if they're fully compliant with all laws, right? We've talked about a few today that people probably don't know about. So hard to make that promise in your document, but maybe you limit the indemnity to that to 15% of the purchase price, right? And so there's a negotiation to be had, but it's about and this is where the emotion kicks in, because here's what happens. Most deals start with there's sort of a pre-negotiation, get to know you. It's like dating, right? You're dating. And then you have what's called a letter of intent, which is almost like an engagement, right? That's your engagement ring, right? You get in the ring, the letter of intent is like your engagement ring. So we're a little bit further along. We're really getting to know each other, getting ready for the big day. And that's an emotional process, right? Because really it's almost like signing a prenup is what we're doing with the purchase agreement at that point. But the client tends to, I think, once they sign that letter, they get the engagement ring, they tend to sort of, a lot of times mentally go to a beach. I say they're on the beach, meaning at this point, they don't even really, they're just ready to sign anything, right? I could tell them it's the worst document you could ever sign in your entire life. They'll sign it. And sometimes they do. And sometimes it's just my job to tell them that it's the worst. I can't, it's not, I'm not going to like run away from you or walk away from you. I'm just like, I have to tell you, I might write you a letter, but that's the hardest part. It's like when your clients get really emotional and they get really invested and they really feel like, this is happening. Sometimes it's hard to call them back to reality. And the problem with that is a lot of times they have more leverage if they did, right? And so if the buyer really wants you, like I have seen sellers completely stonewall buyers where they're like, no, I'm not signing that. No, I'm not going to be personally liable. And they have that mentality where they're not on the beach. They're right here, right now. They're here, they're present, and they're not putting up with any of this crap because they have a market. They know there's other buyers out there. And they don't want, and if you want my company, you're going to sign this thing and my liability risk is going to be pretty low. I love those sellers. They're great. I love all the sellers, but they're a lot of fun to work with because the buyers can't stand them, but they want the business. So what are they going to do? But they really have just no fear. And I love that because they kind of see the market and they see leverage where they understand their own personal leverage in the deal. But then you have the other clients where it's like, they're just gone. Like they just sign the piece of paper and they're gone. And it's like, they don't want to fight for anything. They just don't care. And that's their right. It's not my job to tell them, what to do. It's my job to advise them what they should do, but they have the ultimate decision to turn this. It's their right to decide whatever they want to do, unless they tell me, don't let me make it, which rarely they ever do. I always tell my clients, you're the bus driver, right? I'm not going to kill your deal. It's not my job, right? You're an adult. You can make adult decisions. I'm here to give you the most information you can get and, guide you where I think it should be based on what we see in the market, based on what we know, based on our experience. It's not our place to, we're not going to decide for you. So if you want to make a bad decision, you're allowed to make a bad decision as long as it's an informed bad decision. That's the most important thing from my perspective, but I'm not going to stop anyone. So that's always hard though, but I don't like when they do that because I think that they don't really understand their leverage at that point. They just don't understand that, you can demand a document where it doesn't have that, level of high indemnity, as we call it. But you have to be one of those people who's really willing to fight for it, because the first draft you will get of any document when you're dealing with most of the time when you're dealing with buyers in this market, especially private equity, is going to be like, pretty much we have 100% the right to just, if anything goes wrong, we have the right to blame you and take our money back, and maybe even actually more than our money back. So that's usually draft one. So that's kind of, again, another reason why you should never sign these documents without a lawyer. In fact, if you ever work with a broker who tells you this is just like signing a real estate contract, like when you buy a house, it's nothing like that. That's complete false. And I've heard that that's happened. So that's why I say that to people, you really need to work with a lawyer on these things. It's super important that you work with a lawyer who knows M&A, mergers and acquisitions, exits, and can help you through this process. So that's sort of the express version of that with a little bit of ramble. Sorry about that.
Well, Paul, I think we've officially gotten 10 pounds of information into a 1 pound bag.
That's what I'm trying to do. I'm a fast talker. I'm from New Jersey. We learn how to talk.
You and me both, Paul.
Right.
It's definitely, yes, it's yet another Blabbit sausage. Just stuff it all in there. But I have to tell you, Paul, this is fascinating. Just absolutely fascinating stuff, and overwhelming at the same time. So I'm excited to learn it, but I'm scared now to understand what the potential lay of the land actually looks like. But I appreciate that there are individuals such as yourself who have taken the journey and come back to tell about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's what it is. It's not my job to scare people, but like we've just been through this. For us, I think what people don't realize, there's a lot out there. We like to stay on top of it, like to be in front of it, especially in the e-commerce space. That's kind of our thing. That's what we've been super focused on. But the one thing about e-commerce law is that it's very scalable, because a lot of my clients, I know them better than they know themselves. It's I don't make that assumption when I meet them, but like there's a lot of times they come to me, it's like, I already know your issue before you can even, finish your sentence. I've done that 100 times. It's like a lot of, how many clients come in with ADA? How many clients come in with Prop 65? How many clients come in with intellectual property issues? I mean, so we've seen it so many times. It's just it becomes a little bit predictable, which also makes it a little bit more scalable and allows us to work through so many clients at once. So and therefore affordable as well. And not, we don't have to charge big law prices, which wouldn't work in our model. That nobody would pay us that kind of, and we get that. We have to we want to be accessible to small business. We want to be there with you on launch and grow with you. And then on exit, we want to be there too. So that's kind of the idea. So we built a model around that so that, you don't have to be scared of lawyers. And we even have flat rate plans that, like Seller Basics is our flat rate. It's not our law firm, separate from our law firm, but it's a cool little program we created so that people can start learning to work with lawyers, even small businesses, and having a lawyer that they can call at any time when they need help with something. And I love the program for that alone. That just, lawyers we don't all deserve to be the bottom of the ocean. Just some of us. So.
All right. So now that everybody wants to work with you in the next 5 minutes, what is the best way to get in touch?
Sure. My email is paul@ecom.law. Just email me. It really will go to me. I'll read it. I love reading email. And I do have people help me that in the US. But ecom.law is our website. And if you're interested in our legal plan, sellerbasics.com. Seller Basics. And that's you can actually schedule, if you join, it's like $99 a month, and you can actually schedule a consultation with me for free. Well, not for free. Part of the $99 a month, but it's included in your $99 a month. So it's not free, but you know what I mean. It's complimentary after you join. You get my point. I'm not a good sales. I need some of the sales coaching, because you can see I'm not good at selling.
I don't know. I think your knowledge and your perspective is marketing enough.
That's what I trade on. That's all I got. So.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a great episode. We'll see everyone back here, same time, same channels next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much for having me on. Take care.